Hey, it's Rod Yates. Welcome to Mastering Events, an Audience Republic podcast. Each episode, I'll be talking to some of the world's most accomplished event professionals to discover how they got where they are today, the lessons they've learned throughout that journey, and their insights around event marketing and maximizing ticket sales. My guest today is Brian Kitts, Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer for City of Denver venues such as Colorado Convention Center, Denver Coliseum, Denver Performing Arts Complex, and of course, the world-famous Red Rocks Amphitheatre. The diversity of these venues and the events they hold gives Brian a unique and comprehensive perspective on the event marketing landscape. So too does the fact that he is also a lecturer in sports and entertainment marketing at the University of Denver, granting him weekly face-to-face contact with a new generation of gig goers and providing him with a constant source of learning about new marketing trends and the most effective ways of reaching a younger audience. We talk about all that in this interview, but we start, where else? At Red Rocks. As we were emailing back and forth prior to this interview, you mentioned that one of the shows you've got coming up tomorrow night, I think it is Diana Ross at Red Rocks Amphitheatre, which just sounds divine. What are your on-ground duties on a day like that, on I suppose for any show at Red Rocks, but for Diana Ross tomorrow?
I wear a lot of different hats. I handle all of the venues ticketing, all of our corporate partnerships, and then all of our marketing and communications. And so, tonight we've got Third Eye Blind. Tomorrow night is Diana Ross. Friday night is the Marley Brothers. And so, things are going to be a little bit different for every single one of those, but there's going to be a good mix of talking to our corporate partners who are going to be on site, handling publicity and PR. For anybody in the business, that's getting photographers in and out of the pit. But then it's also sort of pre-promoting the shows. And I think for the Diana Ross show, it's kind of interesting and it's sort of fun because she's setting a new venue record. It'll be 55 years since the first time she played at Red Rocks to her show this summer. And, there aren't a lot of artists and there aren't a lot of venues that can claim that sort of longevity. And so, we've had both the honor and the fun of, talking about that as she comes back to Red Rocks again.
Yeah, nice one. There are plenty more questions I'd like to ask you about Red Rocks, which we'll get to during this interview. But I actually wanted to go back a little earlier than that into your first ever concert, which I believe was the R&B act, Shalimar. What are your memories of that show?
You know what? I was a really little kid, and it's one of those things that I think for anybody who was living in that top 40 type of era, bands or, acts would go on the road like that, and you beg your parents to take you. And my mom did. And, I think it's one of those sort of very early experiences with music and the way that live music especially can make you feel, whether you're an 8-year-old kid or you're an 80-year-old fan. I remember the lights. I remember the community experience that, it's something you remember for, every single show you go to for the rest of your life. Being there with people who are all enjoying the same thing at the same time and having a very similar experience. And I think that, that's one of the first things I remember. I think during COVID, it's the thing that we miss most on the venue side, that lack of community and that lack of experience, whether it's sports or music or theater or whatever. And Shalimar was that very, very, very early entry into that world.
Was there a little light bulb that went off on your head that thought, I want more of this?
Yep. And I'm very fortunate in my career. I've never done anything besides sports or entertainment. After I left college, I went to work for Disney and 20th Century Fox doing motion picture marketing, and then went into the sports side of things before I ended up with Red Rocks doing concert promotion. So, you get the bug of taking other people's money so that you can jointly have a good time doing fun stuff. And I've made a career out of it and could not be luckier.
Sure. Those experiences at Disney and 20th Century Fox and then in the sports marketing world, were there any sort of key lessons you learnt in those pursuits that still inform the way you market today, even though you're in a different sector now with the venues?
Yeah, I think people sort of figure out that the fan experience, if you go to conferences, it's the thing you hear over and over and over again. The fan experience matters, but it always has. And whether you are sitting in the dark in a movie theater, you want good sound, you want comfortable seats, you want good concessions. That is no different than being in a venue watching a hockey team or in a concert hall, watching somebody on stage. And, there's a through line there that if you're going to take somebody's money and promise them a good time, you should provide that. And it comes in lots of different ways. But, I think it's one of those things we all think about, but it really matters.
And I think I've heard you say in the past that earlier in your career, you wish you'd paid more attention to the audiences instead of the product. Is that what you mean by that idea of just focusing on the fan experience?
Yeah, it's partly that, but I think it's also, I think when you're on the marketing side, you spend a lot of time thinking about the product, thinking about who's going to be on stage or what the team is and why you should promote that rivalry. When, at its most basic level, when you're talking about demographics and, trying to break an audience down, what really matters is the message that you are going to provide a good fan experience and the opportunity to see a star and, provide a value. All of those three things I think are combined in that star, that value, and that fan experience. As a marketing nerd, those are the things you ought to be paying attention to. And I think people figure that out probably too late because you get so wound up trying to promote the performer
Right.
and hoping that the audience will find that instead of finding the audience and trying to match them up.
So how does that, I mean, are you able to, look at a practical example of how that informs your marketing, that idea of putting the fan experience really at the top?
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit of a shift, but I think that, an easy way to look at this is what you're serving to your fans in a venue from a concession standpoint. There is a real difference between an audience that is coming to see a symphony. That's not going to be a big beer drinking audience, for instance. They're going to be looking at different types of beverages. But we know that if there's going to be a country show, we better have lots of whiskey on hand. It's not just, it's a very practical way of looking at that fan experience by what goes in their stomach. But it's one of those really, I think it's easy for concessionaires to say, here's what we're going to offer you tonight. And it might be the same beer, the same wine, and the same, spirit night after night after night. We know from experience that if at Red Rocks there is an EDM show, a dance artist, we can actually break down the types of dance music that there are and what those consumers are going to buy at a concession stand. That's a really unique way of looking at a fan experience, but it matters, and that's how you sell more, beyond just the ticket.
Absolutely. So you've obviously got very stringent data capturing methods and storage methods, and then I guess the ability to segment that data. That is that key to your ability to really fine tune that audience experience. Excuse me.
Yeah, it really is. And, to be honest, there are ways to get, very nitty gritty about some of that data, especially when it comes to ticket sales. But, I think when you're talking about concessions, that's much more anecdotal, but the figures don't lie. If you're selling a
Mm.
lot of beer for one genre of music, you can see that sort of over the course of the 200 shows that we'll do at Red Rocks. We can see that season by season. Spotting those trends is the fun part of this business, I think. But it's also an important part that I don't think fans realize that happens. They don't just show up with something that they're going to like and buy by accident. We
Right.
know what they're going to buy before they walk in the door, and I think that's fun.
Absolutely. Do you yourself ever go through the audience experience just to check how it's working, whether it's buying the tickets, buying a beer at a show, using the amenities? Do you do that? Is that important for you to do?
I'll be honest, it is annoying. because when I have to do it, I'm lucky. I get to walk into Red Rocks every single night without having to buy a ticket. But the Rolling Stones were in Denver last week. I bought that ticket. I went through the process of parking and getting to my seat and paying more than I wanted to for the concessions. And so, yes, I know exactly what it feels like. It is important, and I think it's important not just at your venue, but at any venue. I love to travel. I love to see other people's venues. I'm used to it now, but I won't go to anybody else's venue ever without, wondering, is that bathroom line too long? Or look, their trash cans are overflowing. Um,
Right.
it's just, should they have more box office staff? Yeah, that's what happens in the business, as you know, and that's how we get better. But, it's also how I'm part of the community of concert goers and sports fans, and I still love that part of the job.
Yeah. Have you ever had an experience either at your venue or another venue which has changed the way that you've done things at any of your venues?
It's a great question. And yes, the very first night that I worked at Red Rocks, we do one show during the winter and it is snowy. We had done it in conjunction with the Ski Industries Association. It was my very first show working at Red Rocks and I fell and broke my ankle.
Oh, wow.
It was just one of those freak things where I was helping a woman to a cab and she was drunk and pushed me off the side of the road and my ankle snapped. That's one of those things that makes you instantly aware of, is your ingress or egress the way that you think it ought to be, and was there enough lighting? There's that on a very dramatic level, but then every night when I buy food at my own venue, is this what I would want to serve, or is this what I want to eat every single night? So yes, that's a long-winded answer, but yes, almost every night there's something that makes me rethink the way that we do things or wonder if we could do better. And certainly when I go to other people's venues, I don't think there's any shame at all in stealing their really good ideas. And that happens too.
Right. Okay. We've spoken, I mean, you have several other venues in your portfolio, which I would also like to talk about. But just
Sure.
one of the last things specifically about Red Rocks, it's such a world famous venue. It's a destination venue. I'm in Sydney, and one day I hope to go to a show at Red Rocks. And of course, they're those famous U2 live at Red Rocks. There are so many examples of its place in music history. Does its status as a destination venue impact the marketing of the venue?
It definitely does. This is one of those interesting things where we can see from our ticketing data that on any given night, 25 to 30% of the audience is going to be from outside the state of Colorado. That's an important metric because it ends up being the number one tourist destination, both paid and free, in the city of Denver. And that means that our Convention and Visitors Bureau spends money marketing Red Rocks as a summer destination in cities like Chicago and Los Angeles and Dallas, as an example. And so one of our partners is United Airlines. That's important because if people are going to come in for the show, as a bucket list venue for fans, not just artists, those partners are important. And I think that travel experience, that becomes important for local hotel operators, for local restaurants, for rideshare services, for all of the segments that visitor touches. And again, that's out of 10,000 people every night that we're going to have at Red Rocks, that could be 2,500 of them who are not from Colorado.
Right. And will you play up different aspects of Red Rocks in your marketing to various places, whether you're advertising internationally versus domestically? Do you play up, the nature element of it to certain segments? Is it, or just clearly focusing on the music?
It's the venue. As a marketing guy, I realize that I'm very fortunate being in a venue that people may already know about. And we've heard time and time again that it doesn't matter who's actually on stage. It is being in the venue that counts. And it's kind of the ultimate Colorado experience, an open night sky with giant red sandstone rocks on either side in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains with a, Coors beer. And it's, I think you promote that. And again, doesn't necessarily matter who's on stage. The venue ends up being the star on some levels. And so I think you can promote that part. You can promote the history. So many people have seen the YouTube video, which is now 40 years, 40 years old plus, but, hundreds of other live videos and recordings that have taken place there, throughout the last, 40 or 50 years.
How do you, or do you, work with the artists when they're playing Red Rocks in terms of marketing their shows? Is it a collaborative effort?
Not necessarily with the artists. They are all aware of where they are. I think in ways that there are a handful of venues worldwide that can get that kind of attention. And so announcing a show at Red Rocks, the show posters, the show merchandise are all going to be venue specific in ways that, I came from, just a, sort of nondescript big sports venue that's like every other big sports venue, in the world. Red Rocks is different, and I think the ability to play there ends up being different. The graphics that show up on social media after the show. And again, because it is one of those sort of famous bucket list venues for artists, we work with them to amplify what they say about the venue before they get there. And, I get asked a lot, what are my favorite shows? And they're always the ones where it's going to be somebody's first time at the venue, because they walk out on stage and see, 10,000 people there with these giant red rocks on either side. And, it is emotional for them, and it's emotional for the crowd too.
Sure. Everything we've spoken about now clearly Red Rocks is a destination venue for artists and fans, but have there ever been any sort of left field marketing techniques that either you've used to promote a show or you've seen an artist use to promote a show?
Not at Red Rocks, to be honest. That said, you mentioned some of our other venues. The city of Denver owns and operates the Performing Arts Complex, which is, sort of classical arts and Broadway shows. We own the Denver Coliseum, which is dirt shows like rodeos and monster trucks and, some of those ice shows. And then the Colorado Convention Center, which is exactly what it sounds like. And I think when you're doing those types of things, yes, the giveaways and the mascots that get involved, whether it's for a circus or, ice shows, you get a lot more freedom with those types of things than you do sometimes with artists. That said, we hosted the 25th anniversary of the South Park animated series a couple of years ago, and that's one where it's based on a cartoon. Paramount Pictures got really behind it, did a series of pop-up stores around the city. It's sort of one of those irreverent shows. And so there were pop-up cannabis stores, fake cannabis stores inside the venue. Things like that I think are fun. They, again, add to that fan experience, even if we're actually not selling weed at the venue. And then, we've had artists who do their own pop-up stores. Those aren't necessarily, probably the left field zany types of things that you're talking about. Sure. But, we've had artists do, pop-up merchandise stores in downtown Denver because they know that they've got a following, and, there were more than 10,000 people who were wanting to go to the show. So every once in a while you get something cool like that.
Across those venues which you mentioned, are you seeing any trends in audience ticket buying behavior? And does it vary by venue and genre?
It doesn't. I'll be honest. I think that we are seeing a softening of ticket sales generally. This is one of those sort of sad things to talk about. I think coming out of COVID, people were spending on anything and everything. And, we just hosted a conference in Denver of event and venue marketers. And one of the big discussion points sort of across the industry is shows selling out later, ticket prices dipping a little bit, and sort of a softening of the market the entertainment industry, I think across the board, not just concerts, but sports and any of the ticketed things. I think that is one trend that we're seeing. On sort of that happier side, I think that what we are seeing is once a fan commits to the experience, they're all in. And I think that our per capita spending on food and beverage has done nothing but increase. And I'll go back to my Rolling Stones experience, last week. Once you commit to spending $400 for a ticket, you're going to go and you're going to buy that extra beer and you're going to shell out for the merchandise. And so I think that those sales have kept pace and or increased as a trend, even if ticket sales generally are softening a little bit.
With those ticket sales softening or in fact coming through a little bit later, what can you do as a marketer to try and mitigate that, to try and A, get people to buy, and B, get people to buy earlier?
I think it is an awareness that you may need to start earlier, that your sellouts are not going to be as immediate as they always have been. At Red Rocks, we could count on putting a show on sale and having it be sold out sometimes within the hour. If we have to work it longer, that's an important thing. If we have to let people know that, this show is still 6 months away, but, start saving for it now, we can do that. We've had a couple of shows. I think this is an interesting trend, a couple of bigger 2-day experiences at the convention center that are dance shows where there is actually an ability to purchase basically on an installment program. And you never want to think, man, my ticket is so expensive that I'm going to pay it off, that the promoter is going to help me pay it off, over a period of several weeks or several months. But that's what's happened. And, if we have to get creative in those ways, I think that can happen. But I think there's also going to be kind of a resetting of expectations from promoters, from artists and venues when it comes to what the general public can afford and what they will pay for. I think we're also seeing a little bit of realization that some of those really big ticket shows like the Rolling Stones are once in a summer or once a year things. And there are a lot of fans who will pay for that, but then they'll give up the 2 or 3 smaller shows that they might have seen at another time in the summer to be able to afford that Stones ticket.
Which creates an issue at the other end of the spectrum, doesn't it? For those smaller independent venues, I guess, who are then losing those 3 or 4 nights of concerts that people might have bought tickets for.
It does. But I guess I think that an awareness that that's happening is the first step toward, everybody sort of leaning in and protecting each other and figuring out ways to, help both fans and venues and artists adjust to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't, to be clear, I don't think the Stones should be penalized for having, an expensive ticket.
Sure.
It's a fantastic show and worth every cent. But I think that realizing that consumer behavior is changing a little bit over the last year or so, post-COVID, I think that's an important piece of what we do.
Yeah. In terms of reaching the consumer, in terms of digital channels, obviously Meta, I presume for you as well, but Meta is
Sure.
a key channel. Outside of Meta, though, are you finding that any other digital channels in particular are also proving impactful in terms of reaching your audiences?
I think that especially as a venue, when we have worked with Meta or TikTok or Instagram, things that are very visual, but also have that sound component in a way that, it used to be if you place in a radio ad, it was all sound. And that's fine. I think we get the benefit now of having somebody actually watch something and listen to it at the same time, even if it's only for, 10 or 15 seconds. So I think those have been effective. But, I guess I also think that not necessarily kind of your standard social channel, but, being able to market through a Spotify or a Pandora, in very specific neighborhoods, you can dial down so intently on, some of your audiences. It's not just the genre. It can now be the neighborhood. If I want to if I want to reach a fan of a certain band within 2 miles of Red Rocks, I can do that. And it
Mm.
takes a little bit more work, but I think, it's just like fishing. You don't go into the middle of the ocean with a hook and a worm. You want to be more specific, and there's no difference here.
Right. With being that ability to be specific, again, I guess comes down to segmenting and really understanding your audience and where they are. You must have a lot of ticketing data coming in from across your various venues before you can even segment that data. I mean, how do you even manage and keep track of all that data that's coming in?
Our ticketing system, we use an exclusive ticketing provider in Access. It's AXS. And it is, it's one of those things again where I think we actually do a couple of different things. We can take the ticketing data and see who bought a ticket to what show and where and when. But I think you can also start to look at what device they were using, and then you can do overlays with another system that we use that is not related to our ticketing system that can start to say, this person used this credit card in this neighborhood, and they probably, you can start to mix and match that type of data. To be blunt, that's more data than we need most times. But I think that it's cool that you can do that. It is not specific to a person. We never know that it's you, Rod, that we're talking to, but we get to be able to, we get to be able to say this is the type of fan who has been at our venue for this particular show. Let's talk to that fan again about this one that we've got coming up. It's a habit. You get into it, and it's not as friendly as knowing your neighbor, but it is the same sort of process, I think. If you're going to take care of your fans and you want to know that they're going to drink White Claw or bottled water as opposed to a bunch of whiskey, we know that. And I think again
Mm.
that that's a matter of improving their fan experience in order to boost our revenue. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah. Can you think of an example? There's probably many examples, but where you've seen data come in and it's really shaped your marketing decisions?
Sure. The easiest thing is, and this is going to be pretty basic to, I think, a lot of people who are listening now, but, just how you sell a ticket. You get to look at basic buyer behavior, and you can tell whether they have spent money on football games, whether this is the one concert that they're going to come to this year. And, you can sort of tell, again, this goes back to that fan experience. Are they going to want whiskey that night, or are they going to want beer? And that shapes how we market. It shapes what we offer, and it shapes the messaging that you see when you come into the venue.
What about surprise and delight experiences? Is that something that's important to you in terms of, again, having that data and perhaps knowing it's someone's birthday, or perhaps just knowing something about them that means that when they enter a venue, perhaps it's just their buying preferences. When they enter a venue, you can somehow communicate with them and let them know, hey, this is happening over here, or hey, happy birthday, get 10% off at concession. Or is there any sort of those experiences which you use or you see being used?
We see it a lot, I think, especially on the sports side. To be honest, I think it's easier to do when you've got a consistent set of fans, like a season ticket holder in your venue. At Red Rocks, we've got 10,000 different fans every single night for most of the summer. And so it's a little bit harder to do in that circumstance.
Sure.
That said, I do think that it is easier to do with our corporate partners. They can choose an entire row of a venue at the Arts Complex or at Red Rocks and give them all a free Coke, or give everybody a coupon to something. I think those types of experiences, again, when we're talking about the fan experience, those things matter. It's hard to do it on kind of a mass market level, but I think I think those things are important. And to the extent that they spread the word, even person by person, that your venue cares,
Mm,
that makes a difference.
right. The fan experience, we've talked about it being so key. Not everyone has a good time. You can't make sure that everyone has a great experience at a show,
Right.
and presumably you must have complaints coming into
We do.
your venues and, see what disgruntled customers and what's upset them. What's the best way to deal with a disgruntled customer so that they don't lose faith in your venue or your brand?
Dealing with them honestly is the most important thing. I mean, look, we all love what we do, and it's easy to get defensive. That's not helpful at all. Immediately assuming that the customer is always right probably is a good place to start. I think it's important to admit that yes, our parking was off last night, or man, we're sorry that you had an issue with the ticketing app not working the way that you wanted it to. That apology, treating people like a human, and this is going to sound so basic, but I think venues sometimes forget. There's a human at the other end of that phone line who wants a response and expects a response, just the same way that you or I would. And so I think dealing with them and telling them what the issue was, and if you can, making it better. And I think sometimes that means going out of your way. We had a guy who, I just happened to walk by and, see him fall and drop his food on the ground, as he was going up the stairs. He left it there, went back, sat down by his wife, and that's $20 worth of, nachos or whatever it was that he was willing to give up. I think if you're in the business of making people happy, you go up, you get those nachos from the concession stand and take them back to his seat. And that's what we did. Yes, is it a little bit expensive? Yes. But is that guy going to spread the word? Yes. And I would much rather have that situation than, some of the complaints we get, say, I'm never coming to your venue again because the parking attendant treated me badly. There's always a way to make up for something. I would always rather invite somebody back to the venue and help them have a good experience, even if it means giving them a tour or, a free T-shirt or something. It's too easy to lose customers once you've got them, but keeping somebody who's sort of, 1 foot out the door is a lot easier than starting completely over.
Absolutely. Moving now into some of the technology that you might use at venues. I know that Red Rocks was for a while using Amazon's palm reading technology, but I believe that's no longer. But can you see biometrics playing a role again in the future around things such as ingress and in-venue purchases?
Yes, I think anything that is going to speed up a process or make it easier is probably the wave of the future. And I think that's probably very cliche and very broad. But, I think that when you walk up to a concession stand, you can walk up to a concession stand in a sports venue now, and if you are wearing a jersey with a chip in it, the cash register can, recognize that chip and automatically charge your account. We are going to get there, and I think that whether it is, putting your smartphone or your watch up against a pad that's up at the concession stand and automatically paying for it, that's only saving you probably 7 or 8 seconds. But if you do that over, 400 or 500 people a night, all of a sudden your lines are moving much, much faster. It's with ticketing systems. There are ways for you to get in now that are obviously on your phone or on your wristwatch where I've been doing this long enough that you had to have a paper ticket at one point to get in, and then it was PDFs, and it's like, oh my God, what do we do with this PDF? And then barcodes or QR codes. So technology is moving very, very quickly, and again, a long-winded answer to that is the future of this type of business.
Right. Well, I mean, what technology do you think has had the biggest positive impact on venue operations over the past, say, 5 years?
I think I would say digital ticketing, just because it has sped up a process, both in terms of sales. I also, that Shalimar ticket from whenever it was, we probably had to stand outside of a record store and wait in line to buy that ticket. Those days are long gone. Doesn't mean you can't still do it, but that's just not the way it is. So I think that the ability to sell a ticket, track a ticket, transfer a ticket literally within seconds, I think is important. The ability to load that ticket with extra money to spend at a concession stand without actually having to have a outlay of cash. I think all of that is moving very, very quickly. But then I think there's another part of it. I think the ability to collect and listen to music digitally is, as important to this industry long term, because it extends the experience that you've had in venue. And so I
Hmm.
think that, there's sort of an ecosystem here that feeds off of, all of the other parts of it. And I think that's important too.
Last thing on ingress, which I imagine it must be quite unique at Red Rocks. Would that be the case in terms of how people get in and out of the venue?
It is powered by your body. It's it sounds like, it is in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. We do get complaints that you didn't warn us that there would be a lot of stairs and that there would be a hike up to the venue. There are shuttle services available up and down the property. That said, it is a fairly rustic place, and women who wear high heels are asking for it. There are rattlesnakes, there are foxes and skunks. There's a lot of wildlife. You should be hydrated, and you should be prepared with sunscreen if it's, one of those late afternoon shows. So yes, it's an interesting venue to get in and out of. It's a National Historic Landmark, which means that the Interior Department has said that it is of unique historic importance to the country. And so we cannot change the roads. There are a couple of roads in and a couple of roads out, and it's always going to be that way.
Mm,
And that, that's part of its charm, but it's also part of its challenge.
right. Has there ever been a rattlesnake incident in a show?
Not in a show, but it's not unusual to see one laying in the middle of the road on, a morning when a show is loading in. They don't want to hang
Right.
around, so they move pretty fast. But
Sure.
we do a thing called Yoga on the Rocks, which during the summer is 2,000 people every Saturday morning for an hour. And last year, it was one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen, because you've got, it's very quiet except for the music, and you've got 2,000 people there doing yoga, and all of a sudden, a deer just walks through the middle of the crowd, the middle of the venue, all of these people doing yoga, and, just like there was nothing, nothing going on.
Wow.
You don't get that at, the hockey or basketball arena where I used to work. So,
That's right. One of the things that particularly a lot of festivals are talking about at the moment is the impact of climate change on their outdoor events and weather incidents, which are causing some shows to or some festivals to be cancelled. Clearly, Red Rocks is an outdoor venue, and I think there have been weather incidents over the years. Is there anything you can do to try and mitigate those incidents? Obviously, you can't control the weather, but how can you prepare, or how do you prepare your audience to ensure they still have a safe, premium experience?
this is one of those things where I don't know that any outdoor venue is going to provide that premium experience when the weather turns. I think that it's part of being an outdoor music fan. Outdoor venues aren't for everybody. That said, Red Rocks is a little bit higher in elevation, so we're never going to get the heat issues that some of the festivals that have canceled have had. That said, Colorado's notorious for thunderstorms that build late in the day and then dump a bunch of rain and hail and lightning. We will stop a show for lightning and ask everybody to go back to their car and wait the storm out. Preparing people to do that, that's part of, for better or worse, the Red Rocks lore. You know that that's what's going to happen. Getting people to do that when our security guys go on stage and say that you've got about 15 or 20 minutes to get moving. Fans don't love doing that, and we understand that, but it's a safety issue. And so,
Sure.
impressing upon them that that's what you've got to do. Sometimes that's the best you can ask for.
Do things like push notifications, do you use them at all to warn people of weather coming?
We've got a system called Rave that provides that sort of service. The reality is that when something like that happens, generally everybody's already in the venue, and we've got When you finally get to Red Rocks, Rod, you'll see that there are big screens on either side of the stage. That's the easiest way to communicate because all 10,000 people are looking at that sign at the same time. And
Hmm.
it's old fashioned, but that's the easiest way to do it.
Right. Changing tack a little bit away from your venue work into your work lecturing at the University of Denver in sports and
Okay.
entertainment marketing. I imagine you've got a really captive younger audience there that you speak to
Yep.
regularly. Is it an opportunity for you to learn as much as your students are learning from you? Are you also learning from your students in terms of how they approach live shows, how this younger generation approaches live shows and buying tickets?
Absolutely. I teach 2 nights a week. It's the only thing I'm qualified to teach. So I do it as, a side gig. There's not a single night that I have not, and I've been doing this for years. There's not a single night that I have not left that classroom having learned something from them and hoping that they took something away from, my talk with them.
Yeah,
But I think that especially when you are talking about new technology, I think back to times when they were talking about bailing on Facebook. They didn't want to be on Facebook when their parents could see what they were doing. And these are 18, 19-year-old kids, and so they're pretty honest, even if you're overhearing it or whether they're talking to you directly.
sure.
That turns out to be sort of a broad trend over the next several years that I first picked up from them. There was a point that I've been doing this long enough that there was a point where I asked them, "What's the last piece of music you downloaded?" And they looked at me like I had three eyes on my forehead. It's like, what do you mean downloaded? We don't download anymore. They didn't say it quite like that, but that was the
Yeah.
gist of it. And that's where, sort of that iTunes era was over in favor of not owning the music, but, just streaming it. And,
Hmm.
obviously that becomes a huge trend. And so, especially, like I said, on the technology side, I think you see it, but then there are, I'll be honest. I think that when you get to when you're working at Red Rocks and you've got 200 shows a year, there are going to be several where you get the booking announcement and you just think, who the hell is this? And
Right.
you got a couple of options there. You can either go to YouTube and try and figure out who it is, or you can listen to those kids in my class because they've been talking about some of those artists or saying, how do we get tickets to see these shows? And
Yeah.
every year there are a couple of them that sort of surprise you. It's like, oh, everybody's talking about this. I haven't heard of them, but this is going to be big. And over the past couple of
Right.
years, there have been a couple of DJs that sort of pop up like that. Noah Kahan, who's got a
Hmm.
big career going now, is one that I first heard of through kids in my class, and all of a sudden, blew up. Stuff like that is, I think, part of the reason that kind of teaching is really, really fun.
You mentioned that Facebook example there, and I'm just curious, putting you on the spot here. Is there anything else that's come out of that's just set off a light bulb and you've gone, right, we need to change this in our marketing, or this is an approach that we need to take because you know that the artist coming through does appeal to that younger demographic and they've provided a window for you into how you can reach them.
Yeah, it's not just Facebook. I think that early on we started getting signals that Instagram and TikTok as ways of spreading messages about your venue, even if it's not sort of classic advertising, you didn't pay for a spot, but doing stories about your venue as a way of talking, even if it's showing a picture of a cute deer at Red Rocks, that's venue marketing. And putting that on TikTok or Instagram is as effective as placing an ad in support of Red Rocks.
Right.
You start to hear things like that early on, and that's coming from kids in class. Again, those music trends, when you're starting to hear about individual artists, those are important. I think you also start to see a little bit of the psyche of some of those younger audiences when it comes to things that they think are important, like climate change or inclusion efforts or, other political, um, you know, they're not overtly political, but I think things that become causes that are important to them, that has to play into how you market and again, how you treat your fans. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I would have seen some of those things coming if I hadn't heard it from kids in my class.
Yeah. What about traditional forms of marketing, email being one of them, email marketing? Again, having exposure to this younger generation, is it still effective for late teens, early 20s people? Do you see email marketing still resonate with them?
It is. It is not as immediate as social media. You can be anywhere and within several seconds have gotten that social media message. Email, they're going to see every 3 or 4 days. And that's okay as long as what you are selling ends up being sort of a slow burn. If I'm trying to give you a discount code to something in the venue or a pre-sale code for tickets that are going on sale this weekend, email is fine. It's not going to be the immediate gratification that I think marketers are looking for, but it is still important.
Mm.
And we still use email as follow up. Thanks for coming to Red Rocks. How can we make things better? And by the way, can we sell you this souvenir ticket or this souvenir poster? So there's still a place for it. It's just a slower moving prospect now than it had been in the past.
Right. And does that bring SMS into your calculations at all in terms of being a little bit quicker and a little bit more immediate?
I think that that's probably more effective if you're on site and we're trying to sell you a beer as you're walking by. I
Hmm.
think things like that are probably, more impactful the closer you are. I think one of the things with a venue like Red Rocks, and I think there are probably others in the world, is that we've got 1 million social media followers and or 1 million fans on our email list. I think again, being careful about how you're messaging them, if they're in New York as opposed to a suburb of Denver, is important. Nobody wants to be
Hmm.
spammed, even if you think the venue's cool. So I think we're still fairly aware of that.
Right. Last question about email, and we're almost finished. How many emails is too many emails, do you think? Like, how often would you contact your audience?
Not more than I think at this point once a week. We
Right.
had gotten, and just anecdotally, when I started with Red Rocks 13 years ago, we were doing 75 shows, and each of those got their own on sale email. Now we're doing 200, and getting 200 emails, one for every show, is definitely too many. And you start to see your unsubscribe rates go up. And you should panic when you see that that's happening because that means you're annoying. And that's an easy thing to fix. And so we got to the point where we will do one on sale announcement every week. The promoters know that that's the day that it goes out, and if they want pre-sale codes or they want to be included, they work around us. And that's fine. I think you yourself and I myself can put ourselves in that fan experience. I don't want to get a bunch of emails now. Once or
Yeah.
twice a week is fine. So,
Right. Okay. And so you'll have all those pre-sale codes in the one email for that week, and that's that.
yep. And,
Gotcha.
we actually do a monthly newsletter for Red Rocks, but it's full of, I think interesting things, sort of a recap of what's happened or
Hmm.
trivia about the venue. That's a casual read, almost like a magazine that, doesn't matter if you open it on Thursday or Sunday. And we want you to open it. We can tell that people do open it. But again, you're not going to miss anything vital if you don't open it immediately. And I
Right.
think we look at that differently as opposed to some of those, on sale Instagram stories or things like that.
Sure. Very last thing, you mentioned earlier that you always get asked what your favorite show at Red Rocks is. What perhaps isn't your favorite show, but perhaps is there a really memorable show that you've seen? It may not be your favorite show of all time. Maybe it was memorable because something didn't go to plan. Is there just something that sticks out that you go, wow, I'm never going to forget that night?
There have been a couple. Sometimes it's not necessarily the show. I've seen proposals inside of Red Rocks, and
Right.
that really gets me. I think Again, there aren't a lot of places where you actually think I'm in a really pretty place and I'd like to ask somebody to spend the rest of their life with me. There have been times when Brandy Carlisle was on stage. This was several years ago. She got choked up by just being there and sort of being in the right place at the right time. Honestly, I will never forget the shows that started taking place right after COVID was lifting.
Hmm.
Because again, I think that we had been sequestered for so long and we were furloughed. We were like, even though we're a city government owned agency, if you don't have money coming in, you don't have a job.
Mm.
And so I remember being incredibly moved by the audiences coming in, even if and at the time they were small, they were like 250 people a night in a venue that seats 10,000 people. That's what we were allowed to do.
Mm.
But the ability of people to come back together after having, had to sit in your house for, you know, 18 months or 2 years, very, very moving. And there were a couple of I still get kind of emotional talking about it, just because you don't know what you've missed until it's gone. And
Hmm.
I think in that case, you just think, what if we never get to do this again? And while we were away for COVID, we had several artists that did live streams or very small performances for 250 people. We did a live stream with Megan the Stallion and Little Baby and Sam Hunt and Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, that reached 10 million people around the world with nobody else in the venue. And
Wow.
that's really cool. But the nights that we were able to do 250 people, again with Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, Tiesto, Fits and the Tantrums, to be able to sit there with just 250 people and experience that, as part of that, goes back to that community that I was describing, at my first show, seeing Shalimar. That's why we do this type of work. And being in that communal experience, hearing and seeing the same things, I think is very emotional. And so I don't know that there's any one show, as much as sort of that experience, and especially post COVID.
Yeah, I think that's a great note on which to end. Thank you so much for your time, Brian. It's been really great to chat.
Rod, I appreciate it.